Is that all you have? The one suitcase? Not exactly. Here, boy. Oh, Lassie. That was the first appearance of Odie. Yeah. Oh, hello. Peter the Cat here. I was just reading some Odie comics to Scamp and Sulley here. Going through this book, it reminded me that Odie didn't originally belong to John. He originally belonged to John's roommate, Lyman. And it got me wondering, Lyman's been missing from the Garfield comics since 1983, so it might be interesting to go over the history of Lyman and find out, solve the mystery of what happened to Lyman. I mean, okay, there's a 4-part episode arc of the Garfield show that shows what did happen to Lyman, but let's see what happened, before those episodes aired. So this is the history of Lyman, the lost Garfield character. And I got a bunch of research notes with me, so this is going to look super professional. Isn't that right, Scamp and Sulley? First, the origins of Lyman. Now, Jim Davis got the name Lyman from a college friend of his, and he revealed this in the second volume of the Garfield, the Complete Works book series. And Lyman's first appearance was not actually in Garfield, but in the comic strip Norm Nat, which was a comic Jim Davis did with Bugs that ran from 1973 to 1975. And Bug Lyman was basically kind of the goofy sidekick to Norm Nat, who was the main character and was basically the straight man. And Lyman was, really goofy, kind of dumb, but he occasionally had, moments of intelligence. I like this one comic where Norm Nat asks, so how do I spell this certain word? And Lyman figures it out by just looking at the speech bubble above Norm Nat's head. We didn't have any, very few examples of this strip, that appeared in, some Garfield books, but it wasn't until YouTuber Quentin Reviews, rediscovered the comic strip and also rediscovered, the 1976 John comics. And Norm Nat is just strange because the Bug characters aren't really all that appealing, honestly. And towards the end of the comic, you start to see Norm Nat kind of morph, looking like Garfield with the bug eyes and half open and the lips, while Lyman looks kind of like Odie, minus the ears and the nose. So it's kind of just strange how this pre-Garfield comic kind of morphs into Garfield towards the end. Now I don't know if Davis's relationship with the real life Lyman influenced how he wrote Bug Lyman, but I think it is kind of probably likely that his interactions with his friend Lyman influenced how he wrote the character, because there are a few funny comics where Norm Nat and Lyman are arguing over something, or they try Lyman helps solve a problem or whatever. Now, as we all know, Norm Nat eventually failed. They didn't catch on, and so in 1975, Jim Davis ended the comic, and then in 1976, he started up the John comic, which was the first appearance of Garfield, and he kind of recycled a few comic gags from Lyman into Garfield, but he also recycled the character of Lyman. So basically, John is kind of Jim Davis's author avatar, since they're both cartoonists, and likewise, Lyman is his best friend. And this is also where we got the introduction of Odie, but in the original John comic, Odie was named Spot. And reading the 1976 John comics, aside from a few differences, Odie being called Spot and Liz being a waitress instead of a vet, the relationship between John and Lyman isn't too different from the 1978 relaunch of Garfield. I mean, there's 1 or 2 comics where John and Lyman argue with each other and over a tennis court, and that's recycling a comic from Norm Nat. I do like this one comic where John says to Lyman, "I'm going to make you bleed," and it's very uncharacteristic. This is from the 1976 John comic, where I guess Jim Davis wasn't being more family friendly, and this could be an early foreshadowing of John's animus towards Lyman, with the whole "don't look in John's basement" thing. Going from the 1976 John comics to the 1978 Garfield comics, they redo Lyman's introduction and everything. And I have to be honest, Lyman's not really that interesting a character. He'll sometimes be there for a gag and say something quippy, but that's really it. He has no characterization other than he's John's friend and he's Odie's owner, and that's kind of it. He just makes funny quips once in a while. Rereading these old Lyman comics, it starts to dawn on me, why Jim Davis probably got rid of him. Yeah, this turns out this history of Lyman is actually kind of shallow, since he was only in the comics for 5 years, 7 if you include, the 1976 John comic. But basically, Lyman didn't really add anything to the strips, and after a while, Jim Davis just thought, you know what, Garfield, John, and Odie work fine by themselves. And so by 1983, Lyman just disappeared. Like, there was also the animated Fantastic Funnies, which was the first appearance of Garfield in animation. That had Garfield and John, no Lyman. Then we had, of course, the early TV specials, Here Comes Garfield, and I think Garfield on the Town. Those were the first two ones. Lyman also didn't appear in those, even though those specials aired while Lyman was still appearing in the comics. So it's like, you can see that Jim Davis, he really did not like Lyman that much early on. I mean, he said that he wanted Lyman there because he wanted to give John someone to talk to other than Garfield and Odie, but he just found him to be extraneous, and that's why he got the axe. And then the final insult, though, came in 1984 when Jim Davis published the infamous 9 Lives of Garfield. This book retells how Garfield and Odie met, showing Garfield being born in an Italian restaurant, and then Odie, instead of being brought over by Lyman, John buys Garfield from a pet store, and then he buys Odie shortly after. So it's like Lyman's been retconned out of Garfield canon. So basically Lyman no longer exists. That's poor Lyman there. I have a feeling that when Lyman the bug turned into Lyman the human in Garfield, some sort of divergent character evolution happened. I think that the quality of Lyman, where he's John's best friend, went to human Lyman, while Lyman, bug Lyman's stupidity, went to Odie. So it's kind of like Lyman and Odie inherited separate qualities of Lyman the bug, the original character. So human Lyman just is missing all the personality that bug Lyman had went to Odie. That's kind of strange to think about. And this isn't really unusual in comic strips, by the way. They're just, axing characters. Charles Schultz had several kid characters like Patty, Violet, Shermie that appeared in some comics and Peanuts. But then after a while, they got replaced by other characters like Peppermint Patty, Marcy, Linus, Lucy and Linus's brother Rerun. Introducing new characters, and then he just gets rid of the old characters that they don't really do anything interesting in the comic strip anymore. For Jim Davis, it was the same thing. Lyman just wasn't working in the comic. He didn't appear in any of the animated adaptations, so just get rid of him. However, despite being cut out of 9 Lives of Garfield, Lyman was not completely forgotten, because in the 10th anniversary comic strip for Garfield, something amazing happened. Lyman actually cameos in the logo box of the comic. He also appears in John's photo album. So Lyman is canon to the comic strip, but not canon to spin-offs like Garfield's 9 Lives or the TV series and the TV specials. I don't know, is there a multiverse in Garfield or something? There's one universe where, Odie didn't come from Lyman, and then there's another universe where Odie did come from Lyman. What's going on here? I'm not aware of any interviews Jim Davis gave in the 80s or the early 90s acknowledging what happened to Lyman. But in 1996, we got, the Garfield website, and it's here where we finally got an official explanation of what happened to Lyman. Now, if you go to the character profiles, it describes Garfield and Odie, and on Odie's profile, it says Lyman, came to John's house, he stayed a few weeks, and then he left and forgot to take Odie with him. There is no dramatic, maybe Lyman is in John's basement or something. Jim Davis started that later. It was just a really simple explanation. Lyman just came in and then left. So, So this is a mystery we've been trying to solve, and yet the answer was there on Internet Archive the whole time. Well, that's a bit anticlimactic. This is another nitpick. The website says that Lyman stayed in John's house for a few weeks. However, if you read the Garfield comic, Lyman is there for a couple of Garfield's birthdays, so he was there for a couple years, not a few weeks. So I guess not only does the multiverse exist in Garfield, there's also time dilation or something, or maybe there's multiverses where Lyman stayed a few weeks, and then there's a multiverse where Lyman stayed a few years. I don't know. I'm amazed that Garfield contains all these bizarre, very advanced scientific concepts. This is probably really hard for docs to understand, isn't it? The next acknowledgement of Lyman came in the 20th anniversary book, 20 Years and Still Kicking. And in the section about all the cast members of Garfield, Lyman is listed as a bonus character, as if he's character DLC to the comic strip or something. And it's here. Now, they don't have the website's explanation that Lyman just left and forgot to take Odie. Instead, this is where Jim Davis starts treating it like a joke. And he lists the top 10 reasons why Lyman disappeared, with number one being the infamous "Don't look in John's basement." This is where like Jim Davis finally starts acknowledging Lyman in interviews, and he's going to give like all sorts of contradictory answers just to mess with people. The next acknowledgement of Lyman came in the 2002 Garfield game on the website, Scary Scavenger Hunt. Now, this was like a tie-in with some pastries, like Garfield brand donuts, and Garfield searches through a haunted house looking for these donuts and everything. And in one room, Lyman is locked up in a dungeon. He asks Garfield, "Oh, I'm starving. Can you feed me?" And if you feed Lyman a muffin, he then leaves and gives you one of the lost donuts, and that's it. So I guess in Garfield canon, Lyman came to John, stayed a few weeks or years, then left and forgot to take Odie with him. He then ended up in a haunted house and was locked up until Garfield freed him. Oh, and then in Scary Scavenger Hunt 2, Lyman's decapitated head then appears in like one of the rooms. So he then died. The timeline of Lyman is much darker than I expected. So then we get to the 2004 Garfield movie, and once again, it retells how Garfield and Odie met. But this time it has Odie like being given to John by Liz. And once again, Lyman's not there, so he's been retconned out of the movie continuity. But then Jim Davis started to get asked, like, people didn't forget Lyman and started asking him, whatever happened to Lyman? And instead of repeating like that Lyman just left or that Lyman was in a haunted house, Jim Davis started to give joke answers like, Lyman went to an Amway convention and then was never heard from again, or Lyman joined the Peace Corps and then was never heard from again, just giving completely contradictory answers. And it's very clear he just likes to mess with people about whatever happened to Lyman. He's then asked, could he ever do like a series of comics where it's about Odie's origins and how he met Lyman? And Jim Davis just answered, duly noted. And so far, he has never done an origin of Odie comic. I mean, maybe there's an origin of Odie comic in like the Garfield comic books. I don't know. I haven't read all of them. So far in Lyman's history, we've just gone all over the place. Either Lyman, just left and then ended up in a haunted house. He died and was decapitated, or he went to a convention, or to the Peace Corps, or whatever. We're just getting all sorts of explanations here and there. It's almost like the Joker's multiple choice past, but except Lyman has a multiple choice future where he could have just ended up anywhere. But finally, in 2009, we got the Garfield show, a new animated series. Lyman was again excluded from the direct DVD Garfield movies, but in the Garfield show, they finally did a four-part episode where they finally answer, give a completely serious answer this time, no jokes about being in John's basement, explaining what happened to Lyman. And this is the four-part episode, Long Lost Lyman. Now, I'm going to go over spoilers for this episode, so if you want to watch the Long Lost Lyman, look for it on the Garfield Show YouTube channel. Now, the episode recreates the early Lyman comics where he meets John and, "Oh, John, let me in, I'm cold, I'm starving," everything. And it's kind of funny that the 70s flashback shows, like, John's house is full of beads and everything. But strangely, John, Garfield, and Lyman and Odie don't look younger or anything, or they don't match their own 70s style. But anyway, it's cheap CGI, so I guess it costs money. But anyway, they have flashbacks, and then they show that Lyman had an interest in animal photography, and he sees this advertisement or something on TV about the search for this creature called the Zabadoo. And so Lyman leaves John's house and leaves Odie with him. So I guess Odie doesn't get lost on the trip or whatever. That's when Lyman just completely disappears, looking for the Zabadoo. And then John and Garfield go searching for Lyman. And when they find, the so-called Zabadoo, it turns out it's really just Lyman in a Zabadoo suit. And he explains that the Zabadoo is really some guy in a costume that was scaring away hunters to protect endangered species. And Lyman just took over the role, and he had no phone or mail, so that's why he was never heard from again. But then we find out there's a real Zabadoo. So it's kind of a strange episode. The Garfield show is just kind of a strange show. Lyman's appearance is kind of different. Instead of having the beady eyes, he has big round eyes like John. He also wears a green coat, and it looks similar to how he appears in the 20th anniversary Garfield book. So I guess that was used as a reference. And I find it interesting, the episode adds a little bit of characterization to Lyman, giving him an interest in animal photography and conservation of endangered species. Lyman gets more characterization in the Garfield show than he ever got in the comic strip. And it kind of reveals that if Jim Davis wanted to keep Lyman, then what all you really needed to do, I think, was just add a little bit more characterization and more personality. Like, I noticed in the Garfield comics, like, John goes to Liz, checking up on Garfield, but we never see Lyman do the same for Odie. We never see Lyman in, like, Irma's restaurant. He, like, doesn't really interact with anyone outside of John, Garfield, and Odie. So I feel like if Jim Davis had, like, just put a little more effort, Scamp wants to play. I just feel like if Jim Davis had put, like, more effort into, like, writing Lyman and just putting him in more interesting situations, then maybe he could have kept Lyman around. And the Garfield show shows how that could have been done. If I remember right, I think Long Lost Lyman aired in, like, 2012, because interestingly, a few months after the airing of that episode, Lyman made another cameo in the comics in, like, 2013, but it was just on the back of a "Have you seen me" ad on the newspaper. And he goes back to his original comic appearance with the beady eyes instead of the big round eyes, like on the Garfield show. So that's like, and I think so far that's been, like, the last time Jim Davis has acknowledged Lyman. He has said that questions about what happened to Lyman is what inspired him to do the Long Lost Lyman episode of the Garfield show. The Garfield website eventually added a little profile for Lyman, even though he hasn't been in the comics for, like, years. However, they took the artwork from the 20th anniversary book and changed his shirt from green to brown for some reason. I'm not sure why. As far as I'm aware, Lyman has not appeared in any of the Boom Studios comics, and I don't think he appears in any of the Garfield original shorts on YouTube. So far, the Garfield show and that one comic from 2013 are Lyman's last appearances. So what does the future hold for Lyman? Well, as far as I know, we've gotten some new news about the Alcon Entertainment Garfield movie. Samuel L. Jackson is going to be voicing Garfield's father, a new character named Vic. And there hasn't been any announcements yet about who's going to voice John or Odie or Lyman. If Lyman's going to be in the movie at all. Like, if they're introducing, Garfield's father, who has never appeared in any of the comics or TV specials before, then they could probably do anything. They could bring back Lyman. And if they do bring back Lyman, then I hope they, like, give him a little bit more characterization. Like, I don't expect they just, have him be the same as the Garfield show. Just have him just be more interesting. They really like being pet. Just have Lyman, like, be more interesting and just, I don't know, maybe have more of a dynamic, like, the differences between a cat owner like John and a dog owner like Lyman. Like, it doesn't take a lot of effort to just make him a more interesting character. So, I think that's all I have to say. I hope the Alcon Entertainment Garfield movie is good, and, it doesn't become like the Morbius of comic strip movies or something where people just meme on how bad it is. It's kind of sad that the most notable thing about Lyman is just that he disappeared from the Garfield comic. Like, even TV Trope's profile for Lyman is, like, really short and says more about him just disappearing other than his actual personality, which, honestly, he didn't have much of a personality in the Garfield comics. Oh, man. Jeez, I guess you guys are perking up because of... I'm filling your doggy skulls with so much knowledge about Garfield. I guess that's why you both are waking up suddenly. So that's the history of Lyman. Now, why do people have such a fascination with a Garfield character that really wasn't all that interesting to begin with? I think it has to do with just the mystery around Lyman. I mean, a lot of people see Garfield as a boring and mundane comic strip, but then you have this one character who just, came around early on and then just vanished without a trace, and it entices some mystery around the comic strip. I mean, it touches into the dark fan theories about Garfield, like, maybe John murdered Lyman or something. And then there's some less dark fan theories, like maybe Lyman is actually Uncle Max from Calvin and Hobbes, because the two characters look alike. And it's just a way that people have fun reinterpreting the comic strip, kind of like how Garfield minus Garfield, removes Garfield, and you see John as this loner psychopath just going crazy. It's just a way of looking at the comic strip in another way. And Jim Davis has certainly had fun, giving all those contradictory, crazy answers about what happened to Lyman. It just, entice more mystery. Anyway, that's all I have to say. And I want to thank Scamp and Sulley here for sticking around, listening to all my Garfield rambling. Yeah. Oh, boy. Oh, come here. I just want to say, Scamp, Sulley, you're both very good dogs. Yeah, they've grown on me over the years. Yeah. Oh, boy. Anyway, Peter the Cat here. Bye, everybody. Oh, boy. And they find, yeah. And then they discover where the Zabadoo is hiding, but then it turns out that,